Hey guys, my name is Shreyas and welcome to Simple Biology. Today we're going to be talking about genetic variation, which basically describes how you have variation within a population in order for natural selection to occur. Now that probably doesn't make any sense, so in this video we're going to be learning about that. Before we talk about genetic variation, let's first talk about what microevolution is. Now, just keep this in the back of your mind. This is a very important thing to understand. The evolutionary impact of natural selection is best measured in a population of organisms, not a single organism. So natural selection and evolution occurs within populations. And an organism itself does not evolve with time. It's the population which does. And if you don't know that, I would highly recommend you go and watch previous videos and make sure you understand that concept. Now, microevolution is a change in allele frequencies between a small group of populations over generations. Okay. What is an allele? Well, I'm going to explain that. An allele is a form of a gene that arises due to a mutation. Okay, so genes are basically long strands of DNA which code for genetic information. You can kind of think of them as the blueprints for everything in your body. Okay, so an allele is a different form of that gene, which arises from a mutation. Okay, for example, eye color. Eye color is controlled by one specific gene, and the different. Let's say you have red. You can have green eyes, blue eyes, black eyes, brown eyes. That all comes from different alleles. So although that specific gene is controlling the eye color, different variations on that are the alleles. Okay. So basically, microevolution is a change in the allele frequency. So let's say, for example, like I said, the eye color, there would be different percentages of each eye color. Like, brown within a population could be like 25%, and then green can be like 10%, and black could be like 45%. Whatever, but those are what would be the allele frequencies, those percentages of each allele. And microevolution is a change in those percentages. Okay. And there's three causes for microevolution. The first one is natural selection, which we've already discussed in great detail. But the other two, genetic drift and gene flow, we'll be discussing that in future videos, but just make sure you understand these are the three that causes microevolution. So Darwin's biggest question, the biggest problem with this hypothesis, with his theory in the origin of species, was that Darwin provided a lot of evidence that Earth had evolved over time due to natural selection. He observed individuals showing different characteristics from their inheritable traits, but he soon realized that the concept between variation exists, so variation between organisms within a population. Okay, but he didn't understand how do organisms create these variations among themselves. So how come in any population we're always going to see different variations between the organisms? Okay, and that's basically what we're talking about in this video. So the scientists that actually explained how this variation comes about was Mendel. Now, we talked about Mendel in our genetics unit, and if your AP biology class teaches genetics before evolution, then great, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But some AP biology classes like to teach evolution first because of pre-AP biology. But whatever the case may be, let's just go ahead and talk about this. Okay, so Mendel wrote a paper about the inheritance in pea plants and how these pea plants have these different variations. If you look here, this pea within this pea plant is red, while the rest are green. So I basically ran this multiple experiments in order to find out how genetics works. And genetics is the study of genes, and again, genes is what controls, is like the blueprint for our body and all our traits. So he proposed a model of inheritance stating that organisms pass heritable units called genes to their offspring. So he's basically he proposed a model of how these little genes, these codes of information, were passed to offspring in order to get that heritable traits. So although Darwin had a limited knowledge on genes, kind of like you probably, if your first unit is evolution, he set this as the basis for understanding genetic differences in an evolution. So Darwin said, okay, the reason why we have these differences within a population, these different traits, is because these genes or these blueprints are vary between organism to organism within a population. And so that's basically what genetic variation is. It's differences among individuals in their composition of genes or DNA sequences. Every individual within a species has unique and different characteristics. Okay, no organism is the same. You're never going to find a human being which is an exact clone of you, unless you have like a twin sister or twin brother or something like that. But for humans, right? Humans have different heights, humans have different voices, facial features, humans have different blood types. Those are examples of genetic variation. I can kind of put in this metaphor here, like jelly beans. They're all jelly beans, but they have different colors. Same thing with colored pencils. Now, there's two important terms you have to understand here: genotype and phenotype. So genotype is the genetic makeup or set of alleles in an organism. So you can think of the genotype as the blueprint for your for an organism. The phenotype is a product of an inherited genotype. So the phenotype is what you actually physically see, okay, in addition to environmental influences. Okay, so with my example with the eye color, the genotype would be the gene that controls eye color, but the phenotype would actually be the eye color itself. Okay, now it's important to realize when Darwin realized that this important difference in genotype and phenotype, that's when he realized the how Lamarck's theory on evolution was completely wrong on use and disuse. Okay, so and this explains this right here. So a phenotype is the product of an inherited genotype. So that's the blueprint from the DNA, which is giving you a trait. And additional to this important term right here, environmental influences. So let's say a bodybuilder, right? A bodybuilder gains muscle because of his environmental influences, not because of his genetic makeup. He gets muscles by working out, okay? And that affects his phenotype, because the phenotype's the environmental influence plus the inherited genotype, but it does not affect the genotype itself. So because of that, even though a bodybuilder can gain a lot of muscle and change his phenotype, he cannot pass it on to the next generation because it's not affecting the genotype. Only the genotype can be passed on to the next generation. And then a very last important note here is that evolution cannot occur without genetic variation. So if organisms did not have genetic variation, then all organisms within a population would be exactly the same. And if they were exactly the same, then natural selection cannot occur because, you know, if there's no variation, there's no way that nature can pick one type of organism over the other, and, you know, evolution would not occur. Now, what causes genetic variation? These four things are big things that cause genetic variation. First are mutations. Mutations are just when, you know, an allele, a gene like messes up and then it creates a different allele. Gene duplication, that would be like a gene having to duplicate. You know, we talked about DNA in cells. So whenever a DNA is going to, whenever a cell is going to duplicate, it's going to have to duplicate its genes too. So that would be an example of gene duplication, and sometimes that causes genetic variation. You know, any process that produces new alleles and genes. And another important source of genetic variation is sexual reproduction, because of meiosis, and you can go learn all about that in our genetics unit. But just make sure you know these four sources of genetic variation. And these genetic variants can be produced both rapidly and slowly. Sometimes genetic variants happen with a lot of time within an organism. Sometimes it can just happen as quick as, you know, one cell duplicating in like 5 minutes and creating a new gene, and hence creating genetic variation. So that's it for now. Stay in tune. We're going to be talking about other interesting things like I said here, back here. with genetic drift and gene flow and how that affects allele frequencies. But that's it for now. Genetic variation is as simple as that.